Hello guys, this will be a response video of sorts to this video titled Why the West is Still the Best by Turbos and Talks. Great channel, I love listening to his videos, but I have to disagree, or maybe not so much disagree, but share another point of view that I feel like you should consider when it comes to deciding whether you should move away from the West or not. Now, he does share a lot of ideas I have, I think. He does see the West as degrading. He does value freedom. He does value certain things about other cultures, even though he says that his values obviously changed as he grew older, which is something you need to consider if you are moving somewhere else, that your values will change. And how will those values be reflected in another place? But what I would like to say when it comes to certain ideological kind of leanings, because I consider myself still a libertarian, but over time I've become more of a realist, and I've also become a little bit more selfish, I would say, if I had to put a word on it. And I guess individualism and selfishness is part of libertarianism, at least it should be. So when it comes to freedom, I've become more concerned about the freedoms that I, as an individual, have in another country, as opposed to the freedoms in a country as a whole. And what I mean by that is I don't really necessarily care so much what kind of freedoms a country has on paper if they don't affect me personally. And even if a country has, a lot of freedoms for, say, certain groups, for example, LGBTIQ people. If some countries have lots of freedoms for them, but are very restrictive on certain other aspects that do affect me personally. So the things that don't really affect me, I'm not going to be concerned about it. And that's not because I don't care about the LGBTQI people anymore. Like, ideally, yes, as a libertarian, I would want them to have the freedoms as well. But as an individual looking for a place to live, those things don't necessarily concern me anymore. I'm more concerned about the freedoms I share. I don't really want to live in a place where all these other groups and all these other individuals and people in the society have all these freedoms, which is great for them, but all the things that I enjoy doing are heavily restricted either by the government or by society itself or by my financial position. And that's the other things I'd like you to consider when it comes to freedom. When it comes to freedom, it's not only necessarily what the government restricts you. So in Thailand, for example, you are not allowed to criticize the king or the royal family. There's a very heavy restriction on that certain freedom of speech. And I guess if you have the desire to criticize the Thai king, and that's a thing you really highly value, you probably shouldn't move to Thailand, right? But those kinds of restrictions, even though they are very restrictive in certain countries, they're also growing in the West. There are definitely things that I am not allowed to say in the West anymore, at least Australia. But it's also about the things you're allowed to say in society. So even though some of the things I might not go to jail or be fined for in Australia, although I probably would be, in Australia, if I talk about those things, I will most likely be shunned by society as well. I would be shunned by society as a whole. I would probably lose my job. I would not be able to date anybody. I would, So all of those restrictions that are put on you by the people around you can be just as harmful to your freedoms as they are by, a government. Don't dismiss those things because they are important as well. Like, it's not just about what the government tells you can and can't do. Other individuals can prevent you from doing that as well, to the point that they can actually hate you so much for saying it that they'll, use violence against you. It's not just the government that can use violence. Like, people can break the law, even in places where violence is illegal, to stifle your freedoms. And it doesn't really matter who's done it, your freedoms are going to be stifled, right? So that's how I look at it. So don't just look at the laws that are written on paper. look at the whole of society and what you are able to do in it. Because if you're in a society where the society judges you for things like what you say, of course, but also how you look, your social status, how you act in the society, and your financial position, all of those things you need to bring into account. So when it comes to finances, for example, oftentimes it is influenced, the restrictions are influenced by the government. So in Australia, smoking cigarettes is very, very restricted. It's highly taxed, so it's very unaffordable to smoke cigarettes for most people. And obviously in other places it isn't. But even if that restriction wasn't the reason for the cigarettes being unaffordable to you, perhaps it was simply because you weren't able to get as much income. You weren't, maybe you have a high income, but all that money was being spent in other areas, so you couldn't really afford this other thing. That would be just as much a restriction on your freedom. Yes, it wouldn't be something that was sanctioned by the government. It would just be based on your, maybe choices, specific choices you made. Maybe you decided to be, I don't know, you had a passion for something that doesn't pay very well in a country, and because you don't have the finances, your freedoms are going to be restricted, right? So yeah, all these other people might be able to do all these crazy wild things and have total freedom, I don't know, have harems of girls or whatever it is you can imagine, because they have the money to do it. There, you are sitting over here. Yes, there's all these freedoms for other people, but you as an individual, you can't afford your own home, you can't afford a car, you can't afford to go out, you can't afford to start a family, and it's not really a very good consolation. At least it isn't for me anymore. That there is all this freedom, but you can't be a part of it. If I was more ideological, I would say, yeah, that's great. Yeah, it sucks that I don't have this freedom, but at least there's this overall freedom in the society. But I've sort of stepped away from that a little bit and become more selfish. It's something I would suggest you consider. You may judge me for it, but again, this is kind of my take on freedom. And the other things he talks about when it comes to moving to the West is, moving overseas to a developing country, is that those countries are going to be less developed. They're going to have worse infrastructure. They're going to have worse standards for food. Some of the things he mentions, quality products will be less. Healthcare maybe will be less. All these things. Now this is true. In general, this is true. But there's a reason why those countries are developing, and the West is degrading. Now, when you go and make an investment, the best way to make money in an investment is to start off at the ground level. You want to get into that investment, or for example, if you're buying property, you want to buy in an area where you can see the potential for that area to grow. Like they might have a very good location, for example, but they might have a lot of crime. It might be a high crime area. The people might be undesirable or something like this, but the location is there. Or it might be the opposite. It might be that the people there are great, like the kind of people you want to be surrounded by, but there's not a lot of good infrastructure or things like, or amenities. So whatever it is, if you see the potential in that place and you can invest in it, your wealth will grow as that place develops, as it improves, and as the negatives of that place go away and get better. For example, maybe if a place is in a bad area location wise, that there's like some quick transport that's built, so you can quickly move from that area to somewhere else to work or whatever it is and come back. That area is going to become, the good things about that area will amplify as the negatives diminish. And that's where you want to be. You want to get in on the ground level so that you can grow and develop with that country. It might not be the best, it might not be ideal now, but you can grow with it. You can invest in it, maybe marry into it, whatever it is you have to do, because there are countries that have restrictions on investing into a country, and then there's other countries that don't have those restrictions. So you have to look into that, but there's that opportunity for you to grow. Whereas if you are in a degrading country, if you're in the West, if you're investing here, if you're paying for overpriced property or for something like this, it's possible that the West in the future will become a place less desirable to live. So all your wealth will start to diminish. It will start to shrink. And then as these countries developed and you turn around and look and like see these other countries and think, wow, you'll say to yourself, wow, I should have moved there 10 years ago. I should have moved there 20 years ago. Because look where these countries are now. And in a lot of places, like if you moved to Thailand, maybe, I don't know how many years ago, but you probably could have, you should say you married and you were allowed to own land, or you bought some land for your wife and she didn't rob you of it. You could have made bang, you could have made some major money. You could have had like a good business and things like this as the country developed. It could have presented a better opportunity for you. So yeah, you want to consider where the future will take you, whether you're developing with a country or whether you're in a country that's degrading to the point where you might actually lose all of your freedoms. You might be locked up, or you might be sent to, say, fight in a war, as we see in Ukraine. Ukraine wasn't necessarily a country you wanted to be in before the war, but they had about 10 years after the revolution, quote unquote, in the Maidan, to not be there anymore. And the people that stayed there, well, a lot of them don't have an option to go anywhere else. So those are kind of things you should consider. Try not to get too ideological when it comes to freedoms, when it comes to dictatorships, as I always say. Because I would prefer to be in a dictatorship where my values align with the dictator completely than I would in a democracy where the majority of people who democratically vote for a leader share the total opposite values to myself. Ideally, you want to be the dictator, right? Because then you would have all your values expressed until someone decides to take you out. But that's kind of like an extreme example, but that's how I sort of got over this idea that democracy is necessarily an ideal system, because I don't feel like democracies represent my individual values. And I see dictators that sort of do. And dictatorships and countries with a lot of restriction on voting, communist countries and things like this. And I've sort of reached a point where if my values align with someone, if the freedoms I can experience in the countries, for whatever factors, align better with the country, I really don't care about what other freedoms that I don't care about, that don't affect me personally, there are. Again, you may judge me for this, but just consider it. This is coming from a libertarian. This is coming from someone who's obsessed with freedom, went to all the conferences, loved freedom, still loves freedom, still ideally wants to see freedom, but understands the kind of drawbacks and become a lot more of a realist since then. So that's the video I'd like to make. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope it helps some people out. All the best, guys, and speak to you later.